But on average, the expectation that draws capital into the marketplace is 10%. Now, with debt capital, arguably the risk is lower, and therefore the annual interest charge is lower, so that instead of 10% to get equity capital, you can get debt for, let's say, 5%. Now, today actually, on line borrowing, the 10-year U.S. Treasuries, which is supposed to you can get the risk-free, closed at 1.78, which is remarkably low, because the convention in our economic history is, in order to look at what the base cost is for a sovereign for a well-run sovereign is 3% real. Okay, so traditionally governments have to pay 3% per annum real interest in order to get money. And 1.78 that we've got today for 10 years is really remarkable, and it's complicated and influenced by the Treasury process of quantitative easing that drove interest rates below their threshold level, so that those of you who have money market accounts, if you're getting something, if you're getting a number that's bigger than point something, you're in the clover, because the rates are so low, and they're driven low by the alternative risk-free rates of the government that are so remarkably low in my lifetime compared to what they've ever done before. And so I want to go back to the housing issue for a moment, because it lets me illustrate a point that's really important generally about debt, and we'll talk about sovereign debt. So I said, you can make a really good argument that the mortgage debt we have is a good investment, and it has been a good investment. But we got into trouble when we violated a couple of important principles. So one really important principle in a sound economic society is that people don't borrow money they can't pay back. Seems pretty simple, but it's a really important rule. So the second principle is lenders should not make loans if they think there's a risk that the borrower is going to default. And during the 2000s, we basically suspended both sides of that obligation, so that lenders were loaning money, and because of the way the markets have been structured, they were able to loan money and take a pass on whether the borrowers could actually ever pay it back or not, because we created the secondary and tertiary markets that basically let the loan originators package up and sell huge packages of mortgages, and the rating agencies, God bless them, put AAA ratings, which means these are basically riskless assets, on mortgages of dubious value, and we turned millions of people into real estate entrepreneurs. If you saw the movie, we basically made it possible for people with no economic means to borrow money on 3 or 4 houses. Hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars worth of borrowing. And here, it's not like we didn't get a warning. So in the first 6 months of 2007, just a year before Lehman and the others started hitting the wall, a year before the problem became obvious, in the first 6 months of 2007, 30% of the mortgages that were originating in the first 6 months of 2007 failed to pay the first payment So you might ask, what the hell were they doing? And what were the regulators doing when the face of it was so obvious that we were going to hit the wall? Because when 30% of the mortgages, think about this, are not paying the first payment on a 30-year mortgage, you're going to get in trouble. And we got in trouble, right? Because there were all these elaborate, convoluted, complicated loan packages that had been created. And the irony is, in 1991 or 1992, there was an economist who I think worked at Goldman named Henry Kaufman, who wrote a book, a prescient book, that said, we've entered this era where people can no longer understand the connection between the assets they're buying and the revenue stream to support them. This is when we started having so-called derivatives, right? And so if you think about it, a mortgage, a basket of mortgages with 50 mortgages in it, unless you're willing to do an awful lot of work, you can't figure out what the probability is that the individual homeowners or mortgage holders are going to actually be able to pay or not. And so by bundling this stuff up and obfuscating the connection between tangible assets and flows of money to support the tangible assets, we basically blew ourselves up. Now, I don't know how much you felt this personally, but I have to tell you, I was terrified because I believed that there was a real danger that credit was going to evaporate. So what does that mean for you as an individual? If we had actually gotten to that point, it means when you go into the gas station and fill up your car, it won't take anything but cash. Think about a world where you have no personal credit because the financial system has blown up. That's what happens in the most exaggerated cases. So, you have to go back a while to see where that happened in a major economy. In Germany, it happened in 1923. They had an inflation that was so mind-boggling. It took a wheelbarrow full of German notes to pay for an apple. So in the last 150 years, we've seen conditions where major economies basically evaporated over an abuse of the fundamental understandings related to loan capital and risk. All right? Now, our professor didn't tell you about Argentina. So Argentina is in the news these days because the new president of Argentina has recently structured an agreement to finally settle a situation that has existed since 2002, which coincidentally I was Secretary of the Treasury and believed that the Argentinian case was a really serious case for the world economy because they were about to default. And I believe that they should be permitted to default. That is to say to their lenders, we can't pay the bills, we're going to go through a sovereign bankruptcy process. So again, we've had a long set of arguments. I think they haven't come out right yet as to whether or not there should be a process for sovereign bankruptcy, which in the simplest terms means when a sovereign accumulates so much debt that it can no longer pay the interest on the debt, they're permitted to basically restructure like an individual would in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, where you basically stiff your creditors. either partly or completely. And the reason I wanted to force the Argentinian situation is because we've been through a situation in the 90s with the Philippines and with Mexico, when actually the U.S. stepped in the Mexico case, when they were about to go under, as Bob Rubin and Larry Summers were at the Treasury. And they did something that I think was good. They loaned the Mexican government money to keep them from going into default. But it's an unusual case because the Mexican government had oil revenues they could pledge against the loan. All right, so it wasn't a naked signature loan. It was pledged assets against the money that we gave the Mexican government to get them over the bridge into a safe haven, all right? And so what I had watched happen, in the early 90s, we had a case where most of the Latin American economies had gotten to the brink of failure. And so we had to mention that there was a Secretary of Treasury called Nick Brady who created Brady bonds, which were another way to mask the issue. And so when I was Secretary, I said, you know, we are a participant in doing something that's fundamentally wrong. And as an illustration, this is the real thing. In those days, Argentina had amassed an enormous amount of debt. And the reason they had so much debt is because there were banks like Citibank who had loaned them unbelievable amounts of money. And for their effort, they got as much as a 20% finder's fee, and then 20% interest on the loan. It was the best loans that Citibank ever made, and the reason they were willing to do it is because they were sure that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank would save Argentina, and Citibank would not only get 20% finder's fee and 20% interest rate, but their principal was good. So it was like fishing in a rain barrel. There was no way they could lose because they were counting on those international institutions to stand behind bad decisions by sovereign governments. And I said, it's time to stop this. And so I talked to the head of the World Bank and the head of the IMF and said, we should stop. We should tell Argentina we're not going to do it. That's how they got shoved into this position that they're coming out of now. But it's the reason that Greece, particularly, and Puerto Rico are a problem, because we have not created a sovereign debt liquidation process so that we can avoid a calamity. So you can see it here, but if you look at who owns the Greek debt, it's owned by a lot of European companies, including a lot of European banks who are operating on what I call the Citibank principle, i.e., not to worry, we're going to get paid back because the international financial institutions will not let Greece go into default. Okay? So I think it's way past time when we should deal with this international situation. And I must tell you, I think it's way past time when we should face up to our own, irresponsibility in not being willing to pay on a current account basis for the things we want and need. Okay? Now, the debt crisis that the professor talked to you about were debt crises because the threat was that we were not going to raise the debt ceiling. It's not because we were about to default in the strictest sense because we couldn't pay. It was because the Congress was saying they were not going to raise the debt ceiling, and if the Congress doesn't raise the debt ceiling, we the people, i.e. the Treasury, can't borrow money to pay the debts that we owe. And in a way, it's the worst kind of a fraud, because when they raise the debt ceiling, they're not talking about raising the debt ceiling to pay for new debt. they're talking about raising the debt ceiling to pay for obligations we already have. You know, so it is so irresponsible. It is beyond belief to me that supposedly intelligent adults engage in this kind of behavior in the United States. But if you listen closely, I don't believe you get a clear line of sight on this conversation than the people who've been running for president. Right? They never entered this topic. Some of them have alluded to it and, you know, have made proposals. A lot of proposals have been made would make it even worse. Some of the tax proposals that are on the table would make it even worse. That they allow that it's not going to get worse because they're going to cut spending. So where are they going to cut spending? So, you know, these problems have been inching up on us. So today I think the number is 65% of federal spending is what I call non-decision spending. We already made the decision. It's for Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, those other things we've said we would pay 65%. You know, so when you take that and you take interest on the debt, which right now is unbelievably low because the interest rates are unbelievably low. If you can imagine interest rates going back up to, quote, more normal levels, our interest obligation would soar from what it is now, and we'd begin putting even more pressure than we already have on things like current funding decisions for things that are not automatic obligations for things like Social Security and Medicare, like national defense. All right, so you may think, well, we're spending too much money on national defense. Well, you know, I'm open to people believing that, but I have a requirement that when people tell me we're spending too much money on national defense, and unfortunately, I haven't had an opportunity to have this conversation with the people who are running for president. But you know, my threshold is, okay, you think we're spending too much money on defense? How many nuclear strike groups do you think we ought to have? Nuclear carrier strike groups do you think we ought to have? And that presupposes this question: how many do you think we have now? You know, so I'm a skeptic. I don't think many of the people running could answer that question, first or second. And I don't think many of them could tell you the new Gerald R. Ford that's coming off of the waves in Norfolk is $13 billion, and by the time it's fully staffed, it's $20 billion. And we have 10 or arguably 11 of these groups, and that presupposes a set of knowledge about how many hotspots are there in the world where we could successfully deploy a nuclear strike group, which means a carrier and a couple of cruisers and a couple of nuclear submarines and tenders and the like, Navy ships. And then when you get by all of that, there's the question about how survivable do you think a nuclear strike carrier group is in a world with drones and missiles that can be fired from places like North Korea. So it may change your mind about how many we should have, right? But I must tell you, I'm really aggravated that I don't think any of the current political conversation has any traction on the issues underlying the question of how much should we spend on defense. If you don't like what we're doing, how much do you think we ought to be spending on defense, right? Which is one of the things you really need to know if you want to have an informed decision about, okay, how big should the federal budget be next year? You know, again, we've gotten into a situation, so it's so foreign to what I remember when I was in the government, especially when I was in the government from 61 until 77. So all those questions I've been peppering you with, when President Ford was the president, he could answer all those questions without turning to an aide to get the answer. He knew. And every line of the budget he thought about and made conscious decisions about student aid funding. And if we do student aid funding, what kind of pressure does that put on what we want to do with housing, urban development, and agricultural investment, all the rest? I think he's honestly the last president who knew the answers. Okay, and so we're in this terrible position now where when the president, this president, sent his budget to the Congress announced they were not going to hold hearings on the president's budget. They're not even going to entertain the budget package presented to them by the President of the United States. That's a really bad situation when we've lost the traction that we had not too long ago, where there was an orderly process for considering what obligations we should have and making conscious trade-offs about, for example, again, this is a complicated question. How much money do you think we ought to invest each year in each of the institutes of national health? How much for cancer research? How much for lung research? How much for arthritis and aging and all the other institutes that have names that we spend money to do research? It ends up in universities all over the country. How much do you think that ought to be? So the Congress is not even going to entertain the president's budget. And so I'm really concerned about where we have come and how uninformed so much of our national debate, especially presidential election national debate, is about essential issues of our present and future. So the young people in the audience, I have to say, you need to do better than we're doing. What we, the older generation, are doing now is not worthy of our heritage. And so we need to deal with these issues in a careful, structured, conscious way, because I think it really does make a difference to our future potential. All right, so I think actually we could make a substantial difference in our economic future if we did what I argued when I was the Secretary of the Treasury, if we did fundamental tax reform. And so for me, fundamental tax reform is to really tell the truth. And some of you, many of you will say, well, that's right, but it's impossible. So here's what I mean by telling the truth. In a really truthful tax system, the tax system is used to raise the money that we need as a society to pay for the goods and services we want and need. Okay, so what I left out of that are some important things which I'm going to tell you. I didn't say we should have any tax credits, no matter how worthy the subject. We shouldn't have tax deductions, no matter how worthy the subject. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do anything about those worthy subjects, but it means we should dedicate ourselves to a principle. My principle would be a progressive tax system. Progressive, I believe the principle that people with more should pay more to support our common needs. But I also believe another principle that I find we've reduced almost to meaningless. So I believe if you're a family of four and you make over, let's say, $35,000 or $40,000 a year, you ought to pay at least $1 of federal tax every year. And I'm going to trivialize, but I want to make the point. People with any means at all should be in they should have some obligation. I don't want to take a lot of their money away from them because God knows you need it for it, $40,000. But I want you to pay something so that when you drive on the roads, you can say, this is my road. Just like the people who pay $4 million a year in taxes. I want everybody to have a stake, and I want people with higher incomes to pay more. So what should the progressive rate be? Actually, if we got rid of all the credits and deductions, probably the rate we would need in order to pay our current level of spending is 30% or 32% of our GDP would need to be collected, okay? So it's not a trivial number, but that's the highest rate. And people between 40,000 and infinity would pay something more, up to 33%, okay? Now, I do agree that there are things that we should encourage, but I want to do it on top of the table. So, for example, if we have a common belief that home ownership is a valuable aspect of our society, and you want to encourage people to have homes, I would say it's okay with me to give people a monthly check from we the people so that they can afford a home. Okay, now we have to negotiate the terms of how much does that mean. Okay? But I have to tell you, going back to the crisis we had in 2008 and going forward for a few years, I don't believe we should corrupt the principle of home ownership and home loaning. So I believe, and I argued this and unsuccessfully, that people should be required to have a 20% honest to God equity down payment in order to get a home loan. Now you may argue 15 is okay, but I do not believe where we've gone back to at 3.5% is a very good idea for the long-term future of our society. But we've gone back to it anyway, in spite of the evidence that you're going to get in trouble if you give people home loans that they can't afford to pay for. All right, so I would like a higher threshold. And I'd like to do something else to the lenders at the same time. I'd like to require lenders, banks, and insurance companies and the rest to have a 20% equity reserve so that they can never get in trouble. So that the individuals can't get in trouble and the lenders can't get in trouble because they can't loan up to a position where they can't service their obligations, okay? And then, if we want to help people get home loans and they don't have 20%, and you're so generous as a society, or we're so generous as a society that we want to help people get into a home and they can't put up the 20%, it's okay with me if we write them a check for that, but I want to write them a check. I don't want to confuse the tax system with the purpose of raising money for things we need and want as a society. Because I think it would clean up how we do business in this country if we were clear about what we're doing. So if you think about it, the irony of the current mortgage system is that it benefits the higher income people more than the lower income people, right? So the bigger mortgage you have and the more money you have, up to $1 billion, you get a benefit bigger than people who are arguably at the edge of being able to own their home. Is that really equitable? I don't think it is, but it's how we've evolved. You know, so here's a dilemma for you. If not just this, but a lot of our national policies that have evolved are crazy, how do we get the majority of the people to agree that we're going to change our ways when they have a stake in the way things are currently done? That's not so easy. So I have a flip answer for you, and the answer is real leadership. Real leadership. Not people who pander, not people who insult your intelligence, but people who tell